Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this symposium on ethics and education. My name is John Connolly. I'm a member of the philosophy department and director of the ethics program at the college. And we are very happy to be co-sponsoring this event with our colleagues in the Department of Education and Child Study and the Smith Alumni Association. As many of you know, this afternoon's panel is also a part of the Alumni Association's two-day event called Smith Women in Education. The event speaks to a proud tradition that goes all the way back to the founder's will in 1870. Sophia Smith wanted her college to produce, among other things, teachers. She hoped that through the work of her college, and I quote, "The wrongs done to women will be redressed, their wages adjusted, the weight of influence that they have in reforming the evils of society will be greatly increased. As teachers, as writers, as mothers, as members of society, their power for good will be incalculably enlarged." End of quote. Ever since, thousands of Smith alums have fulfilled that dream of hers as teachers at all levels, from preschool to graduate school. It is a wonderful Smith heritage that many of you in this audience today are continuing, and we are all in your debt. Like our nation itself, the field of education today stands at a crossroads. On one hand, Americans are uneasy that their country is slipping, falling behind. Our confidence has been shaken by the Great Recession. The federal debt has skyrocketed, and many are disillusioned that we have not found a successful way to bring educational and thus economic opportunity to many millions of our fellow citizens, especially poor Americans and especially people of color. But at a time when we need to put more resources and better ideas into our educational system, the fiscal crisis has led instead to budget cuts and layoffs. Bewilderingly, many Americans seem to want to blame and punish the teachers and the schools themselves for the systemic problems. It is not a happy picture. And yet, against this troubled backdrop, millions of teachers and other educational professionals have over the years faithfully reported for duty each morning. Inside their school buildings, they confront, in their day-to-day work, various kinds of ethical challenges. It is to a few of these that we want to direct our attention in this panel. So we have chosen two timely topics for our panelists to address, one of which plays out on the micro level of student-to-student interaction, while the other concerns the most macro of educational issues, the way our approach to education systematically fails to serve the needs of the have-nots in our society. How do teachers, administrators, counselors, and the like deal with ethical conundrums created by bullying on the one hand and gross educational inequality on the other? For the past 7 years, the philosophy department and ethics program have been sponsoring symposia designed to raise questions like these about ethical issues in the various professions. We have looked at medicine, the media, engineering, business, and so on. And we have sought to do this by bringing experienced Smith alumni to campus to talk about their own experiences with ethical issues in these fields. Today, with our focus on education, we have the help of another outstanding panel of Smith alums who have excelled in their various fields. I will briefly introduce the members and then let them get on with the program. Janelle Banks Bradshaw, class of 2000, was a government major at Smith. Janelle, why don't you wave to the crowd? Okay, thank you. She went on to teach 4th and 5th grades at the Mather School in Boston, a public school. In 2005, Bradshaw became the assistant principal of the Cambridgeport School and later the principal of the Haggerty School, also in Cambridge. She focused on increasing rigor in the classroom and closing the achievement gaps that existed in both schools for various subgroups of the school's populations. In the fall of 2010, Bradshaw accepted a new role in the Cambridge Public Schools District's central administration as the Director of Instructional Equity. Bradshaw has a master's degree in urban education and a certificate of advanced studies in educational leadership. Amy Christie, class of 2001, was a Teach for America member in New York City, teaching third grade for 2 years. Christie went on to serve as a learning team leader, school director, and recruitment director at Teach for America. In 2006, she founded the college office at the Bronx Lab School, a non-selective public high school with mostly low-income students of color. As the director of college placement, she crafted a college-going culture at Bronx Lab that resulted in 100% of every class applying and being accepted to college. She also secured more than $6 million in financial aid and scholarship money for her students. Now, Christie is the network director of college for the Achievement First public charter schools in New Haven, Connecticut, and Brooklyn, New York, where she continues to serve first-generation low-income students of color to ensure them equal access to higher education. Jennifer Jencks, Smith School for Social Work, class of 1995, is a licensed, independent clinical social worker, specializing in the treatment of pediatric and adolescent anxiety disorders. She has been in private practice in Providence, Rhode Island since 1997, where she utilizes cognitive behavioral therapy techniques to treat clients with a variety of disorders and phobias. Jencks has been a member of the National Association of Social Workers since 1995. She is currently enrolled in the School for Social Work's doctoral program, and she also teaches at the school. She is something of an expert on the recently enacted legislation in Massachusetts around the issue of bullying, and a portion of her research is on the topic of bullying. Kristy Gertsen Keteltas, Smith at the end of the row, Smith class of 88, is a clinical social worker with a school-based mental health program called Linkages to Learning in Montgomery County, Maryland. In addition to treating mental health disorders during her client's school day, Keteltas runs numerous psychosocial student groups addressing peer issues and behavior choices, including bullying. Prior to doing school-based counseling, Keteltas was an active stay-at-home mother for 12 years. She has worked in community-based human service agencies in the areas of child abuse prevention, crisis intervention, and as a foster care social worker in the District of Columbia. She earned her MSW from Catholic University in 1993. Today's panel will be moderated by my colleague Sam Intrator, Professor of Education and Child Study. A graduate of SUNY Binghamton with a master's from Middlebury, Sam was a school teacher and administrator before doing a second MA and his PhD at Stanford. He delighted us all by choosing to come to Smith, where he has been a dynamic force guiding many of our students in the direction of urban education. Further, with our Smith colleague Don Siegel, Sam founded and directs Project Coach, a youth leadership program in Springfield that teaches and employs teenagers from underserved neighborhoods, showing them how to coach and mentor elementary-aged children in soccer and basketball. The program serves hundreds of Springfield youth each year and is staffed almost entirely by Smith students. I have to remark that with professionals like these five pouring their talents into the field, in spite of all the problems, one has to be optimistic about the future of education in this country. As I turn over today's event to our moderator, please join me in welcoming the panel.
Well, we are thrilled to be here, and we feel a deep sense of importance around these two critical issues. So let me begin by saying that, before the first panel, one of my former students and one of my great mentors, Susan Vincent, came up to me. And Susan, if you could just give a wave right there. Susan teaches at the Young Women's Leadership School in East Harlem. We actually heard a bit about that school. And Susan's been an absolutely transformative educator there for was it 6 years now? 10? 9. My math. But you said something really important to me that I think is just a signpost for this whole conference that I just wanted to share. You said that Kathy Black came through your classroom last week. And Kathy Black is the former CEO of Hearst Publications, so Cosmo, Good Housekeeping, but now she's taken on a new gig, and that gig is the Chancellor of New York City Public Schools and being the steward of 1.1 million students and almost 125,000 teachers. And so, Susan, you pointed out to me that you grabbed her and you had 2 seconds with her and you said, hey, Miss Black, remember, there is no panacea for educational issues. And I guess that I would beg to differ, just sort of being in this convocation right now, which is the only panacea that I know is the fact that we attract really talented, energetic, impassioned people that want to stay at this work over time. And so being here is inspiring on that level. So too bad we can't have Kathy Black with us today to get a taste of this panacea. So thank you. So listen, this is an odd panel to put together. Educational equity on one side and this notion of bullying on the other, and to have it happen here in what's sometimes called the Paradise Valley or the Happy Valley is actually kind of intriguing because this large, far-flung valley has actually been the epicenter, tragically, for two of the most notorious bullying suicide cases in the country. We have the Phoebe Prince suicide and bullying that happened in South Hadley, and the year before that, the Carl Hoover Walker suicide, where an 11-year-old boy from Springfield was mercilessly taunted in his school and went home one day on Northampton Street, sadly enough, and hung himself. So these are live and animating issues for our community. And this program that John described, we did what every school and what every program that serves and tries to serve youth does. We convened our staff and we convened the young people that we work with, and we said, let's talk about bullying. Let's think about what we can be doing with the children that we work with. And one of my teenagers said something really important because I think it draws together these two issues. He said to us, if you don't feel safe, you can barely breathe. How can you learn? If you don't believe in yourself, how do you succeed in school? How can you make it? And the coach our high school coach that said that lives in the north end of Springfield, which has a 30% graduation rate from high school, and it's beset by all kinds of gang violence and continues to be so. And so today's panelists that we have here today are working on the front lines of these issues. Their vocation is to think about and to do in an applied way every day, how do you help kids make it? How do you help communities in which young people live work with compassion, work with empathy, to be places that propel kids to live an opportunity, to live a best moment for themselves and their families? And so I don't think that you can separate the culture of a community from the idea that a community is there to sort of support young children, teenagers, to make the move forward, to grasp access, to grasp opportunity, and to move forward with their lives. And I think that that's what the heart and the core of this panel is. And so, without further ado, what I'd like to say is I think the best place for us to begin as a panel is to have each of our panelists introduce themselves and to share a little bit about the journey from Smith to the current work that they do that focuses on these issues. So, Christy, it's all yours.
Well, when I think about my journey from this room, it was kind of wild to walk back in here, to up here. It strikes me that I think so many of us wouldn't have planned out the course that we ended up taking, but that every part of my journey up until now has informed the work that I'm doing, and I think that's true of all of us. What you do over here helps you with what you're doing professionally. So when I was at Smith, I was an English major. I got interested in psychology. at some point. I was always interested in psychology. I was always writing the sort of the psychological motivation of the character, you know, in my English papers. And I was working with kids in the summer in various mental health and treatment settings, and I got interested in child abuse and how to prevent it. And then, so I didn't know what to do. I had sort of nebulous ideas about helping with that problem when I left school. And I decided I would probably end up in graduate school eventually, so that I should just go start working with kids somewhere and then figure out what to do next. So I took a job. I just ran around with my resume in Washington, D.C., and applied to all kinds of places. And I ended up teaching in a preschool. It was like a United Way daycare center. And I helped for a little while, and then they put me into a teaching position, which I was not really qualified to do, but I did my best. And I did a great job of connecting with the kids. I wasn't so great on the teaching because I hadn't been taught how to teach. And then I was volunteering at a crisis hotline, and I was very interested in that. And it was a child abuse prevention hotline. It was like a warm line for parents to call if they were stressed out. And we had a lot of, and there were quite a few suicide calls. It was a general crisis prevention hotline with a grant to do parent support and child abuse prevention. And then I went to work for them the next year. And I worked there in community outreach doing parent education and child abuse prevention work. And after a year or so, they lost their funding from the city. They gave it to a different hotline, and the agency quickly fell apart. It was, 1990, there was a recession. So I went back to school. And I decided by that time I was clear that I should be a social worker, so I went and became a social worker and continued to work on child abuse, and I did a little bit of mental health. That was never going to be my thing. I really did not intend to be a therapist. So I worked in DC foster care and family work for a while, working with families to support the child in foster care and then try to reunify them or make a different plan for them. And I did a lot of work with the parents, and all along I'm still gaining information, about how to connect with people, how to help people make change, and start where the problem begins. And then after a few years, I got pregnant, and we were planning for a family, and I decided to stop working and be at home with my kids. And I think it's important to say that to a Smith audience because, people are at various places in their career, but I'm very glad that I was able to do that. My husband was able to support us with, his income. We decided not to move into a bigger house, and we did that. And I'm really glad that I did that. And I spent 12 years doing that, and I was very fearful that I would never be able to get back to work, that I would be, outdated and unable to return, and that didn't turn out to be the case. And during the time that I was at home, I did everything from, the first thing I did was I started a Smith Mothers at Home play group, so that I could find other people to talk to who I wanted to talk to when I was at home with my babies, and that was great. I made some of my best friends that way. My kids are still friends with those kids, and that was a terrific connection. And I got involved. I volunteered. I did all kinds of Smith volunteering, and I was the president of everything for 12 years. From the nursery school, board all the way up to the PTA, whatever. I did everything. And I ran 2 Girl Scout troops, one for each of my daughters. And that was another thing that people made fun of me because I was the PTA president and the Girl Scout leader. But in the end, that work really helped to bring skills to the work that I'm doing now. So when I came back to work, I got a job miraculously, and that, I won't bother you with all that business, but I did get a job in the schools, and they wanted me to do clinical work. So I work now for an agency that it's a cooperative between the Montgomery County Department of Health and Human Services and the public schools, where private agencies are given grants by DHS to go into public schools which have below a certain poverty line to provide social services. And I do the mental health piece. So I'm able to do, I have a caseload of kids that I work with who have a diagnosis, a lot of anxiety and depression, and a lot of kids who just have emotional regulation problems. Your acting out kids are, in my office. And then I do lots and lots of groups, and that's really my love. I love to do that. I really feel like connecting with kids. I do groups with bullies, and I do groups with kids who are unable to make social connections, who tend to be victimized, and that's my favorite thing, is to find a way to connect with kids and help them motivate themselves to change, to take themselves out of those roles. So that's what I'm doing now.
All right, Amy, you're. Yep.
Hi, my name is Amy Christie. I was a 2001 at Smith. I'm excited to come back for my reunion this May, which is a big deal. I was a sociology major at Smith, and I like to say with a true liberal arts education, I had no idea what I wanted to do when I was graduating from Smith. And my father, of course, had often many conversations with me during the spring of my senior year about that very problem. We paid it? Yeah, okay, Dad, I get it. And so in that pursuit to figure out what I was going to do after I graduated, I applied for myriad opportunities, which included a marketing position at Ogilvy and Mather, which is clearly aligned to what I'm doing right now, and a apprentice teacher position at the Shady Hill School in Cambridge, Massachusetts, for those of you who are familiar with it, and then namely Teach for America. And ultimately, I got into both Teach for America and the apprentice program at Shady Hill, and had to make a very, my first ethical decision was, where I really wanted to go. And ultimately, it came down to the idea that education was extremely important to me personally, and that in particular, when I think about my high school experience and growing up in a very big public high school in a small town in Ohio, no one was talking to me about Smith. It just wasn't on the table. And in fact, a teacher said to me, just so you know, there are a lot of people like Amy applying to Smith, so don't get your hopes up. And that was in a town that wasn't quite so, I did not live that particularly challenging upbringing, so it wasn't like it was a crazy idea. So then at this decision-making point, it was either work as a third grade teacher in Harlem or be an apprentice teacher in Cambridge. And ultimately, I decided that what I was most aligned to was teaching in an urban environment that, and in a school and as a teacher, and being focused specifically on closing the achievement gap. I know you heard a little bit about this before. But I found, thinking about my growth and being at a place like Smith, that I had been afforded lots of educational opportunity, and students weren't, just because of where they grew up. So I taught third grade for 2 years, by far the hardest job I have ever done in my life. You think it's easy to teach a third grader how to sit. For those of you who are third grade teachers or elementary school teachers, you know that is no small task. But did relatively well within my 2 years of teaching, and then ultimately felt like there weren't enough people having a conversation about, why did something like Teach for America exist within public education today? So became a recruitment director, actually spent time trying to get people to do what I did, and then ultimately was at a panel for TFA one day with a bunch of principals, and I met a principal named Mark Sternberg, who was founding a school in the northern central part of the Bronx, and he was looking for a head of college office. And I thought, wow, like this is sort of the perfect mix of the things that are most important to me. From someone who may had not gone to a place like Smith to now be in a position where I could advise young high school students about where they could go after high school. It was a really, I can remember the room where I heard him speak and thought, that's what I want to do. So I was fortunate that I got that position and founded the office. Bronx Lab, as you know, is a public non-enrollment high school, so there's no test to get into Bronx Lab. We served kids from every zip code in the Bronx, and quite honestly came from every sort of facet of being interested and or wanting to go to college. So I had ninth graders who walked up to me the first day and said, I know where I want to go. And I had ninth graders who said, you're crazy, like I can't afford college, or college is not an option for me. So I was there for 4 years, and I loved every minute of it. And fast forward to my current experience, and I haven't even been there a year, and my responsibilities are to work now with 19 schools and to run all of their college readiness initiatives. So basically, I'm taking what I learned and created at Bronx Lab and trying to replicate it across schools in both New Haven and Brooklyn. Some of I think my sort of crowning moment, and I don't think she's here, even though I tried to lure her into it, but last year I had my first student get accepted and choose to attend Smith. She's an engineering major, so cool. She writes me, I'm so glad actually she's not here. She'd be extremely embarrassed that I'm talking about her like this. But it is, I think a very to think about high school and think about how fortunate I was to end up at a place like Smith, which was sort of arbitrary, and then be in position to influence people to choose places like Smith or think about their external possibilities in a significant way is really important. And now thinking that I have a chance to really impact hundreds of kids in the choices that they make post-high school is something that I'm really excited about. So that's sort of my journey. And I think ultimately I'm going to be the president of Smith College. I just want to put that out there. Don't worry. Don't worry. Not anytime soon, at least. But I see the future of really thinking about issues of access and equity into higher education much longer down the line. Thanks.
Carol, any comments? Jennifer, yeah.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Jencks. I'm a clinician that snuck into this education conference. I'm happy to be here. I'll tell you a little bit about my journey. I actually was a business major in undergrad. I went to another liberal arts school. I went to Colby College, and then decided afterwards I had no idea what I wanted to do, but I knew I didn't want to do anything with business. And it was at a time when they were really trying to encourage women to go into business. So I was getting scholarships and all kinds of extra grants and having special interviews, and all kinds of wonderful things were happening. But I just knew that that wasn't going to be it. So I actually was a teacher for several years in a private school, because at the time they hired without any experience, and evidently I taught 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders a variety of different things. But as I did that work in the classroom, I realized that what I really wanted was to be closer to helping kids out. I was not able as a teacher to really spend enough time with kids and spend enough time with parents to make a difference. And I realized, just like Christy was sharing, that I wanted to make a greater difference in the lives of children. So I was lucky to meet some Smith graduates of the School for Social Work. I decided, applied, and was accepted to Smith. Graduated in '95, 9 months pregnant. So like Christy, I sort of wove in the family and kids and career path, but I stayed working inpatient at first and then in private practice. I mostly specialize working with children with anxiety disorders, as was said about me already, but I obviously work with all kinds of issues. Nobody just has one particular area of emotional difficulty, and so help kids with depression and all kinds of school issues. I'm constantly in 504 meetings and IEP meetings, and working with schools is a huge part of what I do in trying to help children today. Something overcame me a few years back, and I decided I needed to come back to Smith and get my doctoral degree. I can't quite figure out exactly what it was, but I am here and I'm very close to finishing. In the middle of this summer, I'll be finished with all my coursework. And one of the areas of research that I'm doing is looking at the role of anxiety in the trajectory. Some kids who have experienced abuse or trauma, why they become delinquent. So I'm looking at that as a piece of my research, and it may or may not fit into what we talk about today, but I think it is very relevant for a lot of the kids that we'll be imagining in our minds today as we talk about these issues. So that's me. Pass it along.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am just so honored and awed to be here. My very first class was here, Government 100. In fact, I think I was sitting in Carol Christ's seat thinking that the professor at the time, Patrick Colby, couldn't see me, and I see that's not true. As I sit here today. I'm not sure if I was paying attention, but oh my goodness, whoa. Okay, so it first is just an full circle moment for me to be back in Wright Hall, which is where my Smith journey started. So you heard that I was a government major, and I minored in education, but really was very focused, very sort of Smith alert, in knowing that I was going to be the best possible person that I could be and change the world, because that's what Smithies did. And the way that I was going to do that was either through law or investment banking. And so I was sort of on that fast track to being a lawyer and going into all of those high-powered networks that we do, and did all of the internships that went along with that. And then my senior year, my mom was always saying, you need to think about education. It's a backup. You never know. It might be nice. You get the summers off. All lies. I've never had the summer off. And so I student taught at the campus school, and it was the most amazing, transformative experience that I had, and I knew this is what I want to do. That was a very difficult conversation to share with my family, because they were like, wait, what? We didn't send you there to be a teacher. And that was what I decided to do. And so I was certified when I graduated from Smith and went right into a classroom. I taught 4th and 5th grade in the Boston Public Schools at the Mather Elementary School, which is the oldest elementary school in America, and spent 5 years there. And I would say that I learned, I left Smith with a strong foundational theoretical knowledge, but when I got into the classroom with 4th graders who were, had 27 of them by myself, and only 2 of them were reading on grade level. I went to my principal, who was Kim Marshall at the time, and said, "This ain't the campus school. I need some help." And that sense of urgency, that sense of there are kids here who I know could be great thinkers, and I'm proud to say now that 18 of those students are enrolled in college today. But at the time, it just felt like this very hard road to pass over. And so I enrolled in Simmons for the urban education program, and was in a master's program and did ed leadership and sort of really refined my own craft of teaching. But it was always about how do I close the achievement gap and how do I make sure that kids understand that what they have is really the power that they have within. So it was small things like helping kids understand why their neighborhoods look the way that they did, and when we went to Boston College to visit, why that neighborhood looked the way they did, and it had something to do with voting patterns and who voted and who didn't, and why it was important to tell their parents to go to the polls and vote. And so, you know, you always sort of have that as a personal story, but also sort of teaching your kids and helping them understand the ways in which you can gain power when you don't have power. So from Boston, I moved to Cambridge, and all of my administration work has actually been in Cambridge, and Cambridge is a very different community. So in Boston, in some ways, it was easier because it was a little bit homogenous. So when your whole school is free and reduced lunch, so 98% of the kids qualify for free and reduced lunch, it's a very different dynamic than moving to a school where you either have a 70-30 split, which is what it looked like at my first school, or a 50-50 split. And so what that means is you have kids who are, you know, the famous story I tell is I walked into a room and I had one student who had just returned from the inauguration, and her parents had worked on the Obama campaign, and she was talking about that. And then I also was looking at a kid who'd never been on a plane and didn't even know what that was. And they're all in the same classroom. And so you see the achievement gap right there. And as an administrator, what you're really trying to navigate in that situation, in that setting, is helping teachers understand and parents understand that really it's about creating access for all kids and opportunities for all kids. And so the questions that I asked in Cambridge are a little bit different than those that I might have asked in Boston, which is, are all the students learning, and how do you know that? Because it's very easy and very sexy to sort of listen to the stories of the child who went to the inauguration and participated in the state dinner and not pay attention to the child who hasn't participated. So right now, what I do is I am the Director of Instructional Equity, which is a long title, which really means that I help principals think about whole school change and thinking about how to improve accountability and achievement for all students at all levels, and sort of all of the issues that go with that. So that's what I'm here to talk about.
Great. Well, after listening to the prior panel and this panel, I think that we're an assembly of recovering lawyers and investment bankers more than anything. But I guess that my question, I mean, this is an applied ethics, panel, and I guess that my question for you is to have you think with us a little bit about what are some of those daily ethical challenges, those thorny dilemmas that you face each and every day, and how do you make sense of them, and what are the stories that are at the heart of that kind of work? So maybe we can start, Jennifer, with you. Would it be okay with that?
Sure.
Okay.
So obviously there are lots of ethical things to think about. I'm sort of coming from the clinical perspective. I wanted to mention confidentiality and when to violate confidentiality with children. And again, I'm speaking as a clinician, but I think we're all put as mandated reporters, I think we're all put in this situation at different times. Hearing about kids who intend to harm other kids or do harm to themselves, or hearing from a third party, which is even harder, I think, to know when to intervene. So confidentiality and when to breach that confidentiality, and I think Christy will speak a little bit more working directly in a school about that. But also, the legislation, I think, brings up such an important ethical decision, because now in Massachusetts, the schools have, the law states that any behavior that happens at home is now punishable in school. So if your child is working on Facebook at 11:30 at night and does something that is against the law, that is actually going to be able to be punished, even if it's your computer and in your home. And I think that's a really important ethical decision. It terrifies me as a parent, because now all of a sudden I feel hyper alert. I have a middle schooler and a high schooler, and I think, oh no, I've got to be much more vigilant. I've got to be much more aware. It's made me more savvy as a clinician, and actually pretty excited as a clinician, because now that people are a little bit nervous and have strong opinions about this new legislation, people are really talking about this issue. And I think that's a huge, huge boost. It is controversial. It's very intense, this legislation. And it's, there is a lot to the ethical debate about it. Is it okay that the school or the law can now dictate what goes on in your home? There is a lot to that. So those are the particular pieces. I don't know if we...
Great. Well, we'll get back to that.
I think I have the similar dilemma. It's, and I feel like there's a lot of pressure on teachers, who are sort of the first line reporters for everything, you know, whether the kid is being harmed at home or by peers or just hallway behavior. And it's important to have the adults who are observing say something, because that usually makes the difference, you know, with child abuse and with bullying and suicidality. You know, there are many people who will not notice, but the teachers are in the position of you know, seeing the effects of the things that are going on in the kid's life, because they are barriers to learning. I mean, very often you see it because they can't attend. And I know that puts a lot of pressure on teachers. I think it's almost unfair how many things we're expecting to be done in the classroom in addition to the teaching and the learning and the standards and the testing. So that makes me feel bad, because it's a lot of pressure. But I feel the dilemma for me is that I get the kids referred to me when people are worried in the building about somebody's behavior. They come to me, and I either put them in a group and try to build social skills and empathy, or I work with them individually. And sometimes what happens for me a lot is that I make a connection with a kid, let's say, who's been a bully. And I think the thing to do to move a bully from a position where they are reinforced by the power that they get, and I work with middle schoolers, which is the worst time for this. You know, they really want the peer group affiliation. You know, they want that kind of the boost that they get from making everybody laugh at somebody else, and they will step on any heads they can. All of them will do it. I mean, even the nicest kid, if they have the opportunity to make fun of someone and get a laugh and gain social power, they'll do it. It's really unfortunate, but it's sort of developmentally what they're about, is connecting with their peer group to separate from, you know, the parents. And so I have found a couple times where I've really connected to a kid, and then I found out that they've done something wrong, you know, and I want that child to disclose that, but there's no imminent harm, so I'm not required or even allowed to disclose it. So I find I'm always dancing this dance around, trying to, like, encourage the kid to go back out and take accountability for what they did, and because I know that, and you know, and I don't want to break trust. I'm not legally allowed to reveal what has happened, but I think it's important not to collude with the kid to, you know, to do something wrong. And usually they're letting me know, not out of pride, but by that time we've got some kind of a relationship, and they want to show me their best self, and so they'll tell me where they screwed up, and I'll say, well, what do you think we should do about that? Nothing, because I already got suspended 3 times. I'm not, you know, my parents, blah, 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 blah. I'm going to get beaten when I get home. So that's my big dilemma. Usually I can prevail upon them through various, you know, pressures and, you know, discussions that it would be best to, you know, it would be better to take accountability and have and ask for a little clemency, and that generally, my administration has been really great with me about working that out. But that's my dilemma, is, I want the kid to trust me and have a connection, but I also don't want to have information about something that has happened and not have them come forward. So you may see that too, that somebody did something, but you can't get them to say it, and, that's hard.
I'm just so struck by the fact that the first part of your responses here are really about how do you tend the sort of emotional health of an institution, and how do you deal with the aftermath of being wounded, and dealing with perpetration and bystanding. And I guess that the next set of comments I'm anticipating going to be more structural about pathways out of school and into the great beyond that's the rest of your life. And so I don't know if Janelle, Amy, you want to start, or? Oh, Janelle's going to start? Okay.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Sure. So I think the major ethical dilemma that I've faced, and I am continuing to face, is how do you ensure access to all in the face of glaring inequity? And what does that look like? So when I was a teacher in the Boston Public Schools, again, I talked about a population being very homogenous almost. I mean, a very high low-income population. And so really they don't know what they don't know. And so they only know through exposure that they don't have what they don't have. And moving from Boston to Cambridge, that inequity is right there in the classroom, in the ways in which the system works, the schools that have, the schools that don't, the ability to maneuver, the politicking, and sort of all of those things that happen. And it really is something that I am balancing as I try to discover, first of all, who I am and what I stand for, and how to balance those professional goals with my own sense of what's right and what's just, and really sort of how to make that happen. And sometimes I go home and feel like I've done a really great job for 6,000 kids, and sometimes I feel like I lost that battle and I got to get back on the horse and try again. So that's sort of really what I'm dealing with, particularly at a system level, when you know that there's 6,000 kids on the line and not all of them are getting a quality education. It's really not a good feeling, and certainly something that keeps you fighting and getting up every day to make sure that they all are getting what they deserve and what they need, which is really something I felt in the classroom as well.
And I think I'll just, I think my experience focuses specifically, obviously, on the college access piece of that larger puzzle. And I think in my experience, and I know this context was shared about Bronx Lab, but that it really was a school that pulled students from every part of the Bronx. And for those of you who know the Bronx at all, it is it's an incredible borough, and I think underrated often in terms of the 5 boroughs in New York City. But Bronx Lab was housed in a building that used to have a 20% graduation rate and was one of the 5th most violent high schools at all of New York City. And so in our first years of existence, the students who came to Bronx Lab, and therefore the parents, were relatively reluctant to send their students there because of its notorious reputation. And so often I think that part of the challenge of my work was having this complete shift in the way of thinking and the perception that if you come to a place like Bronx Lab, you actually are going to college. And starting in 9th grade and sort of really grappling with, like, how do I convince, or what do I need to do to help a 9th grader who never thought that this was on the radar of their future be something that was a real and authentic opportunity? And then ultimately, how do I support that student to go through the necessary steps to get there, which is a whole nother ball of wax. But I think I thought about that a lot, and especially in layering on an issue of dealing with my own privilege and my own background, and knowing that wasn't something that was so challenging for me because of where I grew up, and really dealing with those many levels of that process. So it's something I still deal with in my daily work.
So let's stay with this issue for a little bit. I mean, we know that, a city like New York City and its 1.1 million students has about a 53% graduation rate now from high school. And, you're working at the intersection of high school and college. And I know from other conversations how important it is for you to get your young people not just into college, but through college. So what works? What's out there? I mean, what are the best ideas that you're seeing to sort of make something happen to increase opportunity, equity, and maybe, to pursue something more than just opportunity of access, but equal outcome for all young people?
Right, so it's to and through college is sort of, and actually it's something that, and I'm sure, it's actually quite the hot topic these days because I think and in particular, and this is a very pressing topic, I think with institutions like Smith and, our brothers and sisters, and I recently heard the president of Amherst College speak, and for those of you who may or may not know him, Tony Marks is a remarkable guy and has been working with lots of schools like Smith to really talk about what's happening at higher education in terms of persistence, because it's one thing to financially support students who are either underrepresented or low income within very elite selective higher ed institutions. It's another thing to actually have systemic and pervasive support within the school body that actually allows them to graduate. And so I think what I've seen work is when a school, and this really, I know I sound biased here, but Smith is really good at this. When a school really makes that a priority and creates more than just a learning center, more than just a writing center, it's within the dialogue of faculty and the students, every single person is thinking about it. It really makes a big difference. And someone else like Tony at Amherst did the same thing. And so I think that's one piece. It's that dialogue between what is happening at the high school and partnering with colleges in significant ways.
And Janelle, when you think about your work, you're at the elementary school. You've been teacher, parent, assistant principal, principal. I mean, what do you see that's happening at the elementary school level that's sort of working at the girders of this question of equity and equal opportunity?
I think that, and I'm going to actually talk from a system level for a second. So we are implementing response to intervention in our district starting next year, but we're sort of in a planning phase for this year. And essentially what that means is that we are making sure that every child has instruction taught at their level, which seems like a pretty basic concept. But in fact, it's remarkable how many students are getting left behind. And it's also interesting to listen to the dialogue in which people think response to intervention is about low-achieving minority kids, bringing them up, and once again leaving behind the other students. And that's really not what it's about. It's saying, where are all of the students? What can they do? What can they master? And how do we teach them to the best of their ability? And so really what that means is for the teacher, it's providing them with the tools that they need to support students at all levels, students who are below grade level, but also students who are above grade level, who are quite frankly also left behind in many classrooms because the focus sometimes is on getting students up to pass a test. So what works, I think, is obviously creating professional communities where adults are working together and collaborating. We recently working on with the high schools. We have one high school and one alternative high school on coming up with a focus or high leverage strategy for change. And they had been working on creating a common curriculum and common rubrics of how to assess students, but what was missing was teachers collaborating with each other. And so what that bred was 4 different teachers of English 101 for 9th graders having 4 different standards. So if I went to Miss Bradshaw's class, I got an A, and if I went to Christie's class, I got a C, and never the two met, even though there were common curriculum and common rubrics. And so we started really with a piece of student work. I started with a piece of student work to illustrate that to the high school administration, which was a piece of writing from a 10th grader who was probably writing at about a 4th grade level. And when at the end of the sentence, she wrote, she was over-prepared for high school. And so we sort of talked about that, and we looked at her grades, and her GPA was an 85 at the high school, and her core GPA was an 88. And really sort of having this conversation about, so what is the message that we're sending to this student? First of all, we're telling her that she's doing great and that she's ready for college, when in fact, she's not. And how do we sort of calibrate and make sure that we're actually we're not just saying, because in Cambridge we have a very high graduation rate, we're actually preparing kids not just to graduate, but to enter college, to enroll in college, to stay there, to not take remediation courses, to not drop out in a year with $20,000 in student loans. So again, those are sort of when we talk about equity and access, those are the types of issues that are really being faced in large urban districts and suburban districts in terms of thinking about those hidden demographics. So it's one thing to say we're a high-performing district and a high-achieving district, but then when you actually look at what's happening on the ground level, what are the things that you can do? And one thing was, the high school staff said, oh, the teachers need to meet and actually score and grade writing samples together. And we need to sort of calibrate what this means, and we need to talk about what is a 10th grade writing, what should it look like, and we need to communicate that to the student so that this student doesn't think that they are actually prepared when in fact they're not. So those are just some of the things that are happening at a system level.
It's interesting, you mentioned the fact of naming what's hidden, and I think for the last, 2 or 3 years, all across the country, there's been a lot of naming of, I think bullying has been one of those hidden realities that we all recognize from our own, growth and development and childhood. And so, there's been this articulation now, and this voicing, and comes through in legislation, it comes through in community forums, and I think we're all trying to make sense of this. What are some of those, the kinds of issues from your position as clinicians that, maybe those of us as teachers or administrators need to think about in particular around this bullying?
I think the transitional point here is that kids who are bullying other kids, or kids who are, consistently victims of bullying, are not learning either. As Sam pointed out earlier, if you're afraid, you can't learn. There's usually something going on with the kid who's really aggressive and mean to other kids. There's something wrong there, and I feel like those kids need also the opportunity to learn, and they can be very unattractive students, because you have no patience for somebody who's disrupting your class and with angry outbursts and power grabs, and neither will you have a lot of patience for the kid who cannot get her act together and just say, leave me alone, or sometimes those children are not particularly, we are not attracted to them. And I feel like it's also important to make sure that we intervene with those kids to put them back on the track where they've taken care of those things so that they can learn and be their best selves. And I think that what works, and where that comes into play, is that saying something and making some kind of connection. All kids want to please somebody. They're still motivated. Remember when they were, and a lot of your elementary school teachers, that catch them doing something good idea, and we do that in parenting too. Like I noticed, you're sitting in your seat nicely. I really like that. That whole thing still works when they're teenagers. If you praise them and compliment them, they all, blossom to the sun. So if you can catch your difficult kid doing the right thing, and I'm sure you do this all the time, making the connection and offering the ability for them to be a better self works. And I think it's really important to try to get help. Obviously, the teachers can't do everything. So if there's a program in the school where there is some social skills groups, whether your guidance department does it or an after-school group that comes in, something like that, connecting those kids, your student assistance programs, I think making the connection and helping those kids to take a look at what's gone wrong. Why does somebody want to identify with an aggressive, abusive parent and hurt other people? Why does somebody not have the ability to say, I don't deserve to be treated like this, and try to assert herself? So I feel like those kids need attention, and if you are the person who notices the behavior and you can hook them up with somebody who can give them the attention, that also speaks to the ability, to the access to learning.
Yeah, I'll follow up. Christy covered some of the things I was thinking about, but there's another role in a bullying incident that is often hidden and doesn't get talked about, and that's the bystander role. And certainly cyberbullying is sort of a whole other issue. It's sort of a voyeuristic venue where bullying can happen, and a lot of people are watching it happen, literally seeing the comments be posted on people's Facebook page or getting text messages on their phones, what have you. But I really want to focus on, in a bullying incident, the people who are walking down the hall and hear the comments be made, or see the shove, or see the persistent behavior that's going on in the classroom, and somebody is put in that situation. And I speak to you today as people involved in education to consider this role, because you could very well be put in that role yourselves, where you see a situation, you think, it looks like kids being kids to me, I don't think that's reportable, and it might very well be. But there's something about that bystander role that's really important to consider, or actually maybe 2 points. One is that it could cause the child to have a different relationship with you or any other bystander. They would harbor a kind of resentment and anger about somebody who doesn't intervene on their behalf. Mostly it's because it's happening somewhere else in their life, but I really want to focus on the school piece. That's one. So it could be very important in terms of how they behave in your classroom. I lost the other point. Sorry, it'll come back to me.
It might be a great time to sort of take some questions from, we have such a convening of folks who are doing various different kinds of work in the field, and so I think that we wanted to leave ample time for questions from the audience around the array of issues, and I think there's so many points of entry into your expertise based on just even the comments and the preamble that John gave you about your different experiences. So we invite, in the front.
Jennifer. Yeah.
Christy.
It's about the bullying aspect. How do you know, do you work with teachers, number one, to help them identify when to intervene? And how do you know when to intervene? I mean, when is it the time? What are some of the signs for someone to intervene?
Yeah. So the question is, it's a wonderful question, and it's a question of, for folks who are teachers, what are the signs that you can read to know that it might be appropriate to intervene, to sort of start some kind of action? And so, Jennifer, you want to start? Or?
I'll start and then defer to Christy from the school piece. But I actually found a wonderful document just by going onto Google and searching bullying flowchart. And it pops up. It's the first thing that pops up. And it's actually really a useful tool to understand, because bullying is really a huge term. But there are some specific criteria that are important. And if you live in Massachusetts and you're being asked to understand this law and enforce it, it's really worth knowing what is bullying, because persistence is one feature. It has to be something that's ongoing. One time of somebody taking a bad picture or writing a nasty message is not bullying. And so it's important to know what does and doesn't meet the criteria in terms of just your obligation. But in terms of the impact, obviously all of it matters. So today we're talking about access to education, and I really liked what Sam started with in terms of you have to feel safe in order to be available, to be educated. And I think that even if it's a one-time incident and we're not going to call it bullying, if you feel like it's important for a student, a friend, a child that it's still important to intervene.
Yeah, I think that has to do with the way it's received and the way it's delivered, and it really, the legal definitions of bullying have to do with persistence and with intent, to harm and planning, to get this kid every time or say the same thing over and over again to sort of wear them down. That's really the obvious stuff. If you see somebody doing that, But I think always confronting. I think what we were talking about before is the end of this will happen when we have a complete community of connection and consideration. And so schools who do character counts programs and other kinds of system-wide standards of community behavior, that if teachers are always confronting unkind behavior, even if it's not legally bullying, to say, what was that? That doesn't even, and I think it also depends on how does the kid react. If the kid is like rolling their eyeballs and saying something back, then you don't have a bullying problem, you've got a peer discourse. But if you've got somebody, sinking down or looking, some kids take everything hard, even if it wasn't intentionally there. You might, if you have somebody who receives everything as an injury, but in fact, the comment was pretty harmless. You know, it was just the kind of stuff kids say that was not very nice, but wasn't really mean-spirited. It was just teasing or silly stuff. And the child interprets it as an injury, then I would ask for some attention for that child, because there's something going on there where they may end up in a very bad situation because they sort of not allowing. Kids who internalize that kind of victim sensibility are victims across systems, and then something bad might happen. I mean, we need to help her or him not to be so vulnerable to that, to have some response. And so that's another thing, you know, we can help them with.
I'd love to hear the panel talk about your nirvana prevention. We talked about the reactive, and very necessary supports in response to bullying. I'd love to hear you talk about what are some of the systemic, culturally ingrained states that exist that we need to, in tandem, eradicate. I worked with queer and questioning teens in East LA who were not heritage English speakers. So they had a bunch of stuff that
Yeah.
left them open for bullying. So there's the, how do you create the support system for the kids? But then there were teachers who spent their weekends going to the border of Mexico and California as border police. Right, so there's a bigger cultural issue.
Oh, wow.
What are you seeing as some of these bigger cultural issues that we need to be aware of and address so that hopefully none of us have these jobs?
Janelle, do you have any thoughts about that? We were sort of mishmashing around earlier, and I was saying I think the administrative perspective on bullying and the culture in the school, and you know, has a lot to do with. I mean, you know, we can work with the kids, but they have these kind of natural adolescent tendencies to identify with the peer group and to take power and to, you know, click up, because, and that's actually natural and sort of not an abnormal behavior. It's their first step to separating from their parents, is to identify with peers and to say, I'm like these people over here, and that's why we all have the same hair and the same clothes, because we're the same, but we're not like our parents. And then they continue to individuate from there. So that's healthy. It's not attractive to us because we prefer individualism, but that's healthy. But it's when it's that power stepping kind of thing that we need to not tolerate, but I really think that has to come kind of from the top with a no tolerance, you know. Would you agree?
Yeah, so the simple answer is the no tolerance and the posters, you know, we are a bully-free zone. The much more complicated answer is children are modeling what they see adults doing, not what they see them saying or hear them saying. And so if there's anything I would say that you should take away from this, it's really not about what people are saying, but what are they actually doing. So if you have something like character counts or responsive classroom or open circle or developmental design or any of those types of programs, but you still have a building where adults are rude to each other and disrespectful and yelling at each other and sort of bullying each other, you cannot say to children, you know, you should say something and not be a bystander, and bullying is wrong, because the adults are doing the same thing. And so it's incumbent on the administration to make sure that that level of respect is something that's not just about kids. And that is really something that anything you're trying to implement, it's not about them, it's about everybody joining in and taking responsibility. So it's about what are the adult-to-adult relationships, what are the adult-to-student relationships, and then what are the student-to-student relationships. So if an adult is rude to a child, that power dynamic that exists is also going to exist between students and students. And being able to, first of all, illuminate that to adults, but also illuminate it to parents and kids. And that's sometimes very difficult, and very difficult conversations to have, because sometimes you hear, well, I'm the adult, and so I'm the adult, they're kids. No. We all have the same level of behavior and expectations, whether you're a child or an adult or a parent. It may look different, but in fact, everyone should be respectful, and that's the expectation here. And I definitely think the administration would set the tone for that, and also illuminating issues that are hidden. So, you know, as the administrator, you need to sort of look at your community and say, you know what, we need to talk about homophobia in this community. We need to talk about issues of race in this community. We need to talk about issues of diversity in this community. We need to talk about equity and how the power dynamics are playing out within parents, groups. It's certainly takes courage, but I think that really is the role of the administration in leading that work.
My question is, if bullying starts at the top, and I mean the administration and the school board, what is the community to do?
So I'll repeat, if bullying starts at the top, what is a community to do?
I think you just have to start, it starts
Where we
with
need
you.
the clinical expertise.
No, I don't know. I think this
Group
is just
therapy.
this is just the human experience. I mean, that's why we all started to do this. It's a big problem. You just have to start like person to person, and that's what I try to do. It drives me bananas sometimes when I hear the principal talking to the kids, and I'm like, he's bullying them. I mean, he's not really having like a respectful behavioral conversation. I actually think he's a great principal, but people get frustrated, and the dynamics are not always what they should be in every situation, right? In anywhere that you work, they can be these kind of like toxic elements. And so I think you just have to do your best to model, to do what you think is right, to have rules in your classroom, to have rules in my office, in my groups. You can say what you need to say, but if it's rude or if it's insulting to somebody, then, you're out the door and we'll try it again next week. It's just we do not have that. I understand that's what you guys do. I know you're famous for your put downs, but we're not doing it in here. So, I think if you're the one, and they respect you, they like you, they connect with you, then you're making a difference with that group of 30 kids. If your colleague comes in and says something rude and hollers at you and you respond respectfully, with disagreement, but you keep your cool, you're modeling for your kids, that's how it's done. She didn't step on you, she didn't beat you up, you just said, it seems we have a disagreement, and, you model, sort of holding your own but being civil, then that's all you can do, is start with you and do what you think is right and model it, and let's hope it bleeds out, Anybody have a more better idea?
Outside of group therapy, yes.
Yeah.
So I do think it's important to lead by example, and I also believe very strongly that change takes time. So if you're walking into essentially an organization that's dysfunctional, which is what you're describing, that you are going to have to, first of all, recognize and acknowledge that and take small steps and celebrate those small victories, and also publicize, this is the way in which I expect people to behave, and this is the manner in which we will respond and we'll work on this together, and also sort of go back. It's important to go back in history and say, look, this is where we were 6 months ago, this is where we are now. People have to taste that success to try it out and continue it, but it doesn't just happen overnight. So it's not about, let's get a charismatic leader and this person will change the dynamics of whatever dysfunction exists, whether it's a school committee or a central administration or a school. It really is about, yes, you need that charismatic leader, but they also need supports around them, and they need to be able to build teams and build systems. And so if they don't have that capability for whatever reason, it will be very difficult to sort of change that from the outside.
The principal is being fired for standing up to a bully. And our community is not going to recall this. It's very systemic.
Yeah.
Do you want to say that?
Well, I think, I think that we can that'd be a conversation we can grab at the end on that. But I'd love to get some more questions here. Yeah, right? Yeah? Yeah?
I teach women's studies in a very conservative farming community college, multicultural, more people of color than white or Caucasian. But one of the things that I always bring up in part of my, I do it multidimensional multimedia, but in the multimedia aspect of it, I always show that deplorable situation that happened in Southern Cal, I can't remember the community, whereby the young woman was gang raped and there were a large crowd around watching it. So I'd like Jennifer to respond to this because it's talking about the bystanders in this and how they just watched the pictures, no color.
Do you want to reframe a little bit for that? Yeah.
Why don't you reframe?
Well, the question was, if you didn't hear in the back, was focused on what to do about, teaching people to be acutely sensitive to their role as a bystander, and the ways in which we can help people think deeply about that really pivotal role in this bullying dynamic. So, yeah.
And thank you for bringing that up, because I remembered the second point I wanted to say before, so thank you. And actually, I can give you an idea that's a little bit maybe more positive and inspiring, but gets to the same message. I don't know if anybody saw the Dateline special on NBC on bullying. They actually set up a scenario at NBC, and they brought in kids. They had actors play bullies and victims. And they brought in just run-of-the-mill kids saying it, and they told them that they were coming for a special, to be filmed for a special, and they were going to be part of a feature. And they had the parents behind a one-way mirror watching their kids in this scenario. And so once the adults left the room and the kids were supposed to work on something, the bully would start to do some kind of behavior. And they really watched these kids who had no idea what was going on, and to see how they would respond. And these were well-educated kids. They knew about bullying. The parents were sitting there behind the window mostly saying, my kid knows what to do. She won't tolerate that kind of stuff. I know. And it was fascinating. It was one of the most fascinating bullying videos I've ever seen. I was sitting in my kitchen riveted to it. And what was even better is my two teenagers came over, and they were so animated. These are kids who don't talk about things that go on at school. I can't believe that you see that one. She's laughing, and I can't believe. And it was the best device that I've seen in a very long time for having really challenging conversations about bullying. And kids are visual, especially at these ages where they're so challenging. And so having a visual is a great, great tool. And this one, as I said, it will start a lot of conversations, but it really emphasizes how powerful the bystander is. When one person in one of these scenarios said, don't do that, the whole dynamic changed. It's like the whole room changed. The bully said, they had the actors talk afterwards, and the bully said, once that person said that, I felt really uncomfortable. I really felt like I didn't want to keep going. And so it really is a powerful tool and reinforces that even if you just walk by and say, that was rude, or don't do that, or come walk with me to the other kid, one little thing can make a huge, huge difference.
The reason I brought up that question, I wasn't really great at articulating my
Yeah.
question because I'm sorry about that, but there's so much about this is that I actually, this community college is, I have gang members in my classroom in women's studies.
Mm-hmm.
So, and obviously they try to intimidate me and whatnot. And so when I show that deliberately because I was trying to show them, have a good, really good conversation about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep.
Way in the back.
I have a question, we're in a suburban town, and do you have any thoughts on community strategies for bullying in sports when you're talking about adults as role models? There's a lot of recreational dads out there. If you just walk the track when they're holding a lacrosse practice or a football practice at the fourth grade boys, it's just sickening. And in the power of a bystander or on the rec board, how can we infiltrate those recreational programs in a more effective way than currently is happening?
So,
Do you want to speak about that?
does panel have? Well, the questions about bullying in sports, and in one of the, I guess that I would say is that, the program that we run, one of the things that we name right away is the fact that bullying is almost an accepted, and oftentimes it's an instrument of how people think sports should be played. And so articulating that and being able to sort of name it and to talk about the impact that it has. And then the flip side of that is that we really highlight the power of sportsmanship. And one of the anecdotes that we give is that someone did a wonderful study of the ways in which basketball players, NBA players, reacted to a missed foul shot. And so what they found is those teams that were the very best teams were the ones who slapped five, came up and spoke to in between the first and second shot, spoke to their teammate, and basically demonstrated support. And so one of the things that we sort of show and try and teach is that the capacity to be a great teammate, the capacity to sort of step up when you see one of your teammates in anguish is actually a great way to be a better team and to be more successful and to make a higher impact. So being able to speak about it in those kinds of instrumental languages is really important, because in sports is the domain of scoreboard. And so being able to reveal those kinds of things opens up room and space for other conversations. But there is no mistake about it. Coaches need to be called out by administrators, by athletic directors, and by parents, and even by the players on the team, because sometimes the locker room can be the bastion for the worst kinds of reprehensible bullying and misogyny and all kinds of things that are absolutely at the absolute venomous bottom of what sports can be. And so, and tackling coaches, going public with animosity about coaches is one of the most difficult things for a community, because coaches, particularly successful ones, even bullying and horrible, men and women who lambaste their players, can often stand on their record. And that's sometimes an unassailable position in some communities. So it's a tough road to hoe. But the way that we go at it is to again, make the hidden overt, to talk about the shadows, and to use some of those approaches that we just talked about. So yeah. And
One of the things that you talked about in the very beginning, equity education and bullying. In my experience as a teacher at several levels, the bullies have often been the kids who didn't have good education, who were disadvantaged. So I wondered if you could speak to that.
it's a wonderful question, and it is a question about the relationship between educational disadvantage and bullying. And I don't know, is there people on the, Amy, you want to take a crack at something like that? Yeah,
It's a big one.
yeah, it's a great one. Big is good.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think that goes back to even just, I think you say that you teach in an urban district, and automatically I'm saying one, if I tell someone I teach in an urban district, the automatic assumption is that my kids are really bad, and that they're violent, and, so it comes with, a large, that sort of set expectation, which I think is always difficult to overcome. And I found that there was a strong correlation between the student in a school who was deemed like the bully or the bad kid, and in terms of their academic performance. And the schools I've seen actually do a really successful job of this is addressing things like, growth mindset, and really getting into this idea that you don't learn to be bad. It's sort of it's something that you assume. I think I struggle more with like that sort of expectation, right? That it's actually much more difficult to have conversations with faculty that just assume because a kid is low income or of color and grew up in the Bronx, for example, that automatically correlates to them being in a gang and being bad. So I sort of am dancing around this, but I think it's just because I truly struggle with how to explain that externally, and that's that's a big challenge for me when I'm working beyond sort of my immediate urban location. I don't know. I'm sure you guys have probably more to add to that.
I feel like that is very true. And actually, I've had a couple kids. I've had at least. Teachers will always tell me, so-and-so's in a gang, this one's in a gang. They're wearing the colors, they've got they're tattooed themselves with, markers. I mean, only a couple kids have managed to get real tattoos. It does happen, but, because, again, they're young. But the two boys who I've worked with over the last 4 years who did actually have gang involvement, and they're young to be doing that, had actually pre-committed themselves. I mean, usually gangs don't take them that young, but those boys, both of them had missed entire chunks of their education. One hadn't been in school at all before he was in 5th grade, and then he came here as not speaking English, and started school. Very bright kid, but had no formal learning, and the other also had missed big chunks of school. Both of them very charismatic boys, very powerful, sort of attractive personalities, and they basically took that need for mastery and put it into being, a bad kid. and kids were afraid of them, and that was very powerful for them, and kids, sucked up to them, and that was they're charismatic, popular kids who terrorized the building. And I had some success with both of them in just redirecting that wish for power and mastery into something else. I'm not going to tell you a fairy tale. I mean, obviously, there were still problems with both those kids, but I was successful in derailing both the boys from their gang, from their decision to join a gang when they were in high school. Now the one I know still hasn't done it, and the other hasn't gone to high school yet, but I think he's on the good track. And that kid, his grades have come up significantly. He was failing everything, and now he's playing soccer. That's always a big motivator for me. The sports motivation for me is actually useful because you can get them eligible to play, and in work on that, that's something that motivates them because they're going to be the powerful king of the school if they can be the soccer champion. So. What was the point? We were talking about, I lost my point. Oh, motivating the bully, yeah. There's usually something missing, and they take what they have and maximize it. And if what they have is physical power, the ability to influence their peers, then they'll use that. And if you can redirect that wish for power and efficacy into something else, then you might be successful, but it's very hard it takes a lot of time. So, it's hard to do with one kid, but I do think that those are not bad kids. They've just learned that is effective. And then there is also another little psychological piece maybe you want to speak to, that kids who bully often have like a sense of entitlement that people should listen to them, or and it's usually some sort of an injured that they were not listened to, and so they feel that entitlement because it hasn't been fulfilled. So that's very hard to break through, that they have a rule book that's not necessarily the same as everybody else's, but possible to do.
I want to just add something to this particular discussion, and first of all, caution us against creating a stereotype for a bully, and really sort of make sure that people understand that bullies there are bullies who are academically gifted, and they're bullying, and that bullying exists in every facet of life. It existed here at Smith when I was here. It existed within pretty much every organization that I've been in and been a part of. So it's not just a function of your academic ability, but I definitely do think it is about gaining power and about showing that power. And I think from a sort of thinking about it from a race and class perspective, there is definitely a clash or a disconnect between what kids and particular cultures view as acceptable and what we view as acceptable in schools. And that breeds itself in needing to either navigate or translate for kids. This may be acceptable outside of school, but it is not acceptable inside of school. What do I mean by that? I have had many conversations with parents who have said, I tell my kids, if somebody hits you, you hit them back. And so I say, well, that is your family value, and you obviously need to tell your children whatever you believe because it's your right. But in this school, when they hit somebody, these are the consequences. And so they are going to learn that in this environment, when you hit somebody back, there are consequences, and you as a parent can decide how to navigate that situation in terms of saying, we know that the school will take consequences and you can still hit them or don't hit them or whatever, but those are the types of situations that we're talking about in terms of crossing cultural bounds and cultural conversations that I don't want us to ignore in this, so.
Thank you. That's very much what I wanted to say. If you imagine the worst bully you've ever known, either from your personal life or from your school or whatever, think about the worst bully you've ever witnessed. Imagine that person as a baby, as a brand new baby who comes into the world with their own genetic makeup, their own family history, their own material, but everything that happens to that child contributes to who they are as a person. And there is no one thing that wires them to become a bully. They learn behaviors from other places. And so the big question is, where is Johnny or Jane? Where are they learning this behavior? In the research that I'm doing, very often it is from their parents' parenting style. right? If you sit with a parent, it is, they have to go to their room and they have to do this, and then they come to school and they have to do, the kids come to school and they're trying that very same solution, and it's not working for them because they are not adults and they don't have power. And sometimes it's something that's very easy to correct. And I'm not pathologizing. I'm a parent myself, and I've done all the things that parents aren't supposed to do. So I'm really not blaming parents, but I think it's one of the things that we need to keep looking at. So parents can be, our one environment where kids are. TV is another. Internet is another. I mean, there are so many now. I find as a person, as a parent, it's extremely difficult to keep up with all the different things getting into my children's minds. There is just too much. It's hard to stay ahead. But I like what Janelle was just saying. I think we need to keep it a complicated profile, and we need to keep talking about it. I think that's what's going to help us stay current, stay alive, and really begin to make the kind of changes. I'm still struggling with your panacea question. I want to I want to respond to that later.
Well, I think we have time for one more question here. Trina, you are?
So I'm feeling like most bullies are identified by others, so I'm a kind of situational learner and thinker. So if either one of you has a student that came and said, look, I think I'm a bully, what would be the trajectory of that conversation? Repeat the question.
Okay. Trina, I've never heard you not be loud, so I'll repeat your question. It's a great. Trina said she's a situational learner, and she asked a wonderful question that is, if a student self-discloses, I am a bully, what would you say? How would you sort of go forward in a conversation from there?
Can I answer with an experience that I've had recently? So it's one of the things I haven't mentioned is as part of the doctoral program here at Smith, I'm doing a field placement on an inpatient unit with adolescents. And I lead the group therapy with another Smith student. And all the time, bullying comes up as an issue going on for kids. Very often it's what's led them to feel like they want to harm themselves, and that's why they're in the hospital. There was one particular group that was going on, and somebody was getting very heated about bullying and asking for ideas. And it was a very intense group, and somebody was saying, I hate bullies, got very emotional. And this tiny little girl who had been quiet the whole group said, I'm a bully. And the whole group went quiet. I mean, everybody had been ramping up and had been getting really emotional, and everybody looked at her and they were like, why? And she said, I don't know. And it was the most amazing group that I would say I've ever done. But the conversation that went on between the kids, so I'm sort of answering your question, but not really. But the conversation that went on, it actually, because she was so articulate, she was able to say, I don't really know why I do. I know it's wrong, but I keep doing it. It's part of why I'm here in the hospital. It's part of what I need to work on. But that she had the courage to say that had such an impact on me and on all the other kids in the room to be able to say, wait, she's a cheerleader. Wait, she's a bully? Wait, she's able, to be able to get at that. I don't know if any of you want to add anything more.
Well, I know that tonight's dinner will be an opportunity to continue this conversation, which, I mean, really has been focused on, I think, the base qualities of our life: power, relationship, connection, family, school, institution. I mean, all of those things sort of webbed together are both the problem, but also invariably the solution. And so anytime you're sort of trying to dance with complexity, I mean, the way in which all these things fit together is just incredibly, incredibly intense, and can often feel us leaving like it's an overwhelming project. But I don't think that any of you would be in this room and doing the work that you're doing if you weren't about taking on the overwhelming projects that need to be taken on. So thank you so much. I know it's been an intense day of a lot of thorny issues. Thank you.